Now is Texas Congressman Michael McCaul, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman McCaul, thanks so much for being in studio.
Thanks, Allison.
This just feels like deja vu all over again in the most sickening way. You, of course, are the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, and of course you've been focused on terrorism, and we know the reports that you've been issuing about that. But does it feel this morning as though maybe you're focused on the wrong thing, and gun violence is what we should be talking about with Homeland Security?
Well, you know, a lot of terrorist events that happen involve weapons. There are warning signs usually along the way that we miss. This obviously looks like a case of mental illness. We've seen this story way too many times in the past. I think we have a mental illness crisis in this country. I'm not sure what law could have possibly stopped this from happening, but it shows that we need to deal with mental illness, I think, a little more effectively.
So you see this as an issue of mental illness. You don't see this as an issue of too many guns in the hands of the wrong people.
Well, I was a federal prosecutor, prosecuted gun cases. If you're mentally defective under the law, you can't purchase a weapon. So I don't know if it's not necessarily that we need more laws. If we need to treat mental illness, and if someone is mentally ill, that those signs should come up with family, friends, and the gun dealer.
But how can the gun dealer know that you're mentally ill? There's no national database of people who are becoming unhinged. How can the gun dealer ever know that?
Well, if somebody, you know, look, is a little bit off and maybe they're changing or radicalizing as a terrorist, those signs are sometimes hard to spot. You're talking about a Second Amendment right under the Constitution as well. And so to deny that right just on a hunch raises all sorts of legal questions as well. I think part of the problem is addressing mental illness, having people identify people in the family or friends who seem to be off, a little off base, just like in terrorism, about radicalization, the warning signs of radicalization, spotting those early, getting them in the off-ramp so we can treat them, so we can stop this kind of violence from happening.
You and I have had many conversations about terrorism and what to do about it and how much it scares Americans. But CNN has put together overnight the numbers of Americans killed by terrorism since 2004 versus by gun violence. And look at the numbers. There are 313 U.S. deaths from terrorism. And by the way, CNN took a broad approach to what they called terrorism. Of course, they counted the Fort Hood shooting. They counted the plane crash into the Austin IRS building. They counted the Sikh temple shooting. So this was, that's a very comprehensive look. Versus U.S. deaths by firearms. It's 1,000 times more.
Well, one number I don't see on this chart are the 3,000 who died on 9/11 in this city.
Yes, and this was since 2004, so we weren't counting 9/11, but still, throw in the 3,000 from 9/11, firearms are so much more. I mean, is there nothing Congress can do?
Well, again, I mean, Congress will look at this issue. I think most of these cases are mental health, mental illness cases.
Okay, so what can you do about that? What more could you do about keeping, if it's just mental illness, keeping guns out of the hands of the mentally ill? What law?
Well, there's a law in the book already. If you've been adjudicated mentally ill, you cannot purchase a firearm. And so the question is, at what point is someone denied a Second Amendment right under the Constitution? Who determines that? Currently, under the law, it's a judge that does that, not just an arbitrary assessment.
Look, I mean, the problem is that a lot of these people get their hands on firearms before they're adjudicated mentally ill. Sometimes they're not in the system as adjudicated mentally ill. They haven't committed necessarily a crime that has gotten them into jail before or the system. But they are unhinged. I mean, listen, it sounds like you're saying there's not much more we can do.
No, I think the obligation of the citizens in the country to identify friends or family who are going down this path, and in every case, you'll see in this case as well, I'm sure people will come out of the woodwork saying, yeah, you know, he was saying these crazy things, and yet it was never reported to authorities.
Okay.
And a lot of this can be stopped if that was brought to the attention.
Okay, let's talk about that. So if somebody had raised a red flag and said this person appears to be becoming more violent or more unhinged, then would you be comfortable with police going in and taking away their firearms?
I think you would have to have a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether that person is qualified to own a firearm. And under the law, you have to be mentally adjudicated, mentally defective. So yeah, I think we have a mental illness crisis in this country. We have veterans returning as well with PTSD. We have a lot of mental health issues out there that need to be addressed and dealt with. I don't think passing another gun law in the book, no gun law probably could have stopped this case. Tell me what law could have been passed to have stopped this case.
Maybe if there were more background checks of wherever he was. I mean, we don't know yet the history of where he got the gun. But
we don't have all the evidence. The president came out without knowing all the facts. I don't know all the facts in this case. I don't know how he purchased his firearm, and I don't know what the signs were of mental illness prior to his purchase.
Here's what the president had to say in terms of a challenge to Congress about this. Listen.
We spend over $1 trillion and pass countless laws and devote entire agencies to preventing terrorist attacks on our soil, and rightfully so. And yet, we have a Congress that explicitly blocks us from even collecting data on how we could potentially reduce gun deaths. How can that be?
How about that, Congressman? How about more collection of data? How about more of a database that flags people? How about anything?
Well, you're getting into privacy issues as well. Someone goes to a psychiatrist. Do you want the government taking those health records and putting it into a database?
Right, but this is exactly what you're talking about in terms of if mental health is what needs to be flagged. That's exactly. What's your answer?
Well, I think treating it. Here's what I say about terrorism. We spend billions of dollars trying to eliminate the threat militarily and keeping the threat out of the United States. We do very little towards prevention of combating violent extremists in the United States, those who radicalize. We're doing very little to stop that piece. And I think the same argument applies here. I mean, he's right. We're applying all this money to counter terrorism, as we should, but looking very little at prevention. And I think this is where the health community needs to step up. I think people, average citizens in the country who see family members, who see friends who are becoming mentally ill, the warning signs, these need to be identified and treated. But to take someone's private medical records, there's a law, the HIPAA, it'd be a violation of federal law under HIPAA to take those mental health records and put them in a federal database. I don't think you'd see a lot of Americans wanting that either. You would be discouraging a person from going to a psychiatrist in the first place.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously it's complicated, or we would have solved it already.
It's very complicated.
Congressman Mike McCaul, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks.